Welcome to Integrity and Joy. I'm Steve Walker. This is episode 15 of Integrity and Joy, my conversation with former SpaceX engineer Meharban Sobti. So welcome to Integrity and Joy. I am Steve Walker, former U.S. diplomat, activist, educator, and now life coach, meditation teacher, and podcast host. Welcome to this episode. I'm very excited to share this one with you. I think it is a really powerful one and very relevant to what's going on right now in the United States. This is a conversation I had several months ago before the election with Meharban Sobti, who is a former student of mine from 20 years ago or so, and who went on to study electrical engineering at USC and became an engineer at SpaceX. His story is incredible. The adversity that he had to overcome as a child growing up as a Sikh American, particularly after 9/11, but even before then, the bullying, the discrimination, some of his family dynamics, and then, the story of how he ends up realizing that he had an interest and passion in physics, and then ironically goes on to study not physics, but engineering at USC, and then ends up working at SpaceX for a long time, and recently left there, and so I think his story is really compelling. He's incredibly vulnerable and open in discussing his challenges over the years, and his own personal struggles. And I think that's really powerful and inspirational. And then the whole conversation about SpaceX and his experience there, and we get into the whole future of space exploration and the public-private partnership model that we have now, or that's evolving now. And I think that conversation you'll find really interesting as well. And then we didn't know when we recorded this exactly, we didn't know who was going to win the election, and we didn't know really what kind of role Elon Musk would play in this administration. And but I think there are things in the conversation that you'll find really interesting and relevant to what's going on right now, and the role that Musk is playing, and how that role is evolving. So again, I just think it's a really interesting and fascinating episode. So I'm excited to share it with you. As always, I hope you're following the podcast. Please leave a rating and review if you haven't already. And please share this with anyone you think might be interested in this episode or the podcast in general. We'd love to get this in front of as many people as possible. And of course, please follow us on social media at Integrity and Joy on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. Threads, Blue Sky. We're pretty much everywhere. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Meharban. It's a long one. About halfway into it, when we get into the SpaceX stuff, but the first half is incredibly compelling, I think, about his childhood and growing up, and then his journey off to college. So I hope you listen to the whole thing. Anyways, here's my conversation with Meharban.
All right, Meharban, welcome to Integrity and Joy. I'm so excited. This feels like decades in the making. For listeners, our relationship goes back to, so when did we first meet? What year would that have been?
2005.
Wow, 2005. Okay, so 19 years ago. And we were both at Horace Greeley High School in Chappaqua, New York. And I was the teacher and you were the student, but it didn't really feel like that. It felt like I was the presence of a great intellect who was on the verge of a great journey. So it's wonderful to be with you mid-journey and get an update, see how things are going. And I think people are going to be interested in hearing your story too. So let's talk, like, how would you describe your childhood? What was it like for you looking back?
Yeah. Well, both of my parents are from India. Um, my dad came out here with his parents when he was in his early 20s. And then my mom came out here after she got married to my dad in 86. It I had a pretty tumultuous home for most of my life. But I think in hindsight, my parents were very young when they got married. My dad was in his mid-20s. My mom was 21, 22. And I just think they weren't ready to be married. But in Indian culture, arranged marriages are very common, and the things that people bring into their marriages oftentimes just get projected onto their kids, whether or not they mean to do that. So there was a lot of unresolved things that my sister and I had to kind of field growing up from both of our parents, and then there was a lot of just tumult in that regard. So it was not the easiest home. But as I often say to people, I had one God of a parent, and that was my mom. And she grew up with Navjot and me. Navjot is my sister. And I think, there was survival of all different kinds and varieties without getting into the nary details was a big part of my childhood. And there was also I felt a sense of responsibility, of not just in terms of taking care of my sister, my mom to the best of my ability, but a sense like I felt like I needed to really be ready to attest to the decisions that I made as an individual. And that's not something that was really bestowed upon me or talked about in our household. It's just it's an innate sense that I've always felt. Oftentimes I would be a Robin Hood. They were a bully. I'd say, all right, bully, you can beat me up instead of the person you're beating up. That was that person.
Wow.
And I wouldn't say that I'm proud of it. I also wouldn't say that I think it was dumb, but I think one of the things that was really huge about the Sikh identity for me growing up was I'm not a religious man. I'm a very spiritual man, but I'm not a religious man. And the funny thing is that on my dad's side of the family, one of our ancestors is one of the first 5 disciples of Sikhism. So there's a lot of beating of the drum. Yeah, there's a lot of beating of the drum of we're special, we're cool, so and so.
It's a lot.
And it's just yeah, and but the thing is any legacy, I think.
Sure.
The line between duty, privilege, and resentment, these things, they play with each other. And I saw a trifecta across the board with my dad, with his cousins, with his brother, everybody, with my grandparents, and their siblings. But the Robin Hood aspect was I think it's in the blood. And it's just something that manifested because that's a big part of Sikhism, even though like I said, I'm not a religious man, but I recognize that. And so one of the things that a big part of my childhood and growing up, a big part of it was learning to love myself despite what people told me I was. This is before September 11th. A lot of people would tell me what I am, where I belong, where I don't belong. Go back to your country. It's I'm born in the plains. Yeah, I don't understand what you mean by that. And so this journey of I know who I am. I know who I am in a very real way that not a lot of people know who they are, because you grow up, you are given an identity, and you realize later that you have agency in choosing what of that identity you want to embody, any if all of it. I spent a lot of time unraveling the things that everyone kind of lobbed at me within the Sikh community, without the Sikh community, and be like, well, who am I actually? Because I know what I am, and I don't know why everyone's telling me I'm these things or I'm not supposed to be that thing, so on and so forth. And that doesn't make any sense to me. So like, I think that also revolves around this idea of like owning my choices, owning who I am. My like I was always a thinker. My mom used to call me the old man of the house, even when I was 5.
So, okay, so that was my next question. At what age were you having that inner dialogue about identity and who was trying to impose an identity on you and getting that clarity within yourself about who you were, who you wanted to be?
Yeah, I remember really starting. I remember these being thoughts that just were happening vividly at the age of 5. Like a lot of like I remember many things starting at age 5. So yeah, like it was always a thing.
Did anything trigger that, or did it just like kind of your brain got wired that way at that point? Like,
sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I think so at 5 is when my family moved out of my grandparents' house. Up until age 5, we lived in a joint family. And then we moved out at that age for me. But before then, I think there are a couple of things like there was a confluence of things. One of them was within our household, my grandparents did not allow anyone to speak English. So even though my sister and I are born and raised in the US, like we had to take ESL, which is embarrassing. And it's like not like my mom hated that, but she, the patriarchal dynamics of the culture. My dad was afraid to tell his parents that anything really. So I coming out of that, like being in school, and I think I don't remember this, but I think there was an impact of being like I like communicating well, and so I think I always was that way, where I liked communicating, and I like communicating, and I like bringing people into the communication. And so like there's I think an element of like some aspect of shame of like I'm trying to speak to my teachers and my teachers are frustrated. I'm sure that they were frustrated. Like, hey, this kid's born. My mom told me that they used to tell her, Mrs. Sobti, your kids are born in the U.S. They need to be able to speak English. Like it's not that they should not know their mother tongue, but they need to be able to speak English. Like you need to reinforce some of this at home. We tell Meharban this is scissors, and he says kanchi. Kanchi is the Punjabi word for scissors. And so I think some of that carried over into this, like, I have circumstances and I have who I am. How do I address these things? And then when my dad finally decided that he was going to, be like, no, parents, like, I don't want to live with you anymore. I think psychically that was a huge decision for him to make. I don't think it should have been as huge as it was, but it was huge given where he was, mentally.
Yeah.
And I think that like that had an impact on me, where I was like, okay, one can choose. One can choose a different path. And I think like these things, like there are little bits of pieces of these kinds of things that just kind of like, there were little probes. And then at 5, him deciding that we were going to move was just kind of the final straw to unleash it.
Well, and it's interesting that happens at such a formative age, right? Because, around 5 is it's kind of around the age where you're really becoming a social being, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're out of that kind of initial stage of development and more of a sense of self is really starting to develop. And for that to happen at that time, right, where you're thrust into school and are having to take English as a second language, right? Because of the language situation at home. And then your dad makes that break with your grandparents, and that being a model then for, look what you can do, right? There are all these, and identity is like in your face at that point too.
Mhm.
That's really powerful. That's really, really powerful. So, okay, so then you move out. When do you go to Chappaqua then, or when do you end up in
Yeah,
Chappaqua?
that's right. That's right. So we lived in Hartsdale, so right by White Plains, and we lived in Hartsdale. I mean, my grandparents lived in Hartsdale as well, just like literally like like down the street from the condo that we moved into.
And for
Um,
listeners, that's about a half an hour north of New York City. It's in Westchester
Correct.
County, New York.
Correct. And it's so one thing I will say, like I think a lot of people have this very rosy image of Westchester County, and that is parts of Westchester are very, very pretty, and parts of them are not. And you and I both know that.
Yeah.
So lived in Hartsdale from essentially birth through fourth grade, and then fourth grade, I was getting beaten up every day. And I wouldn't tell my mom about it. Other parents would tell her, hey, like we saw Meharban getting off the bus and like it looked like he was in a scuffle. It looked like he's going through some things. Like you need to check in on your kid. And so that came to a head, and like they tried. They tried to talk to the school and like, but there's only so much you can do. And I think Hartsdale at that time, I don't know about it now, but I think at that time there was a lot of working class folks from different cultures and backgrounds. And I think like there was an aggression and a grit that translated into everybody needing to feel like they needed to justify their own identity. And so, like I was the only one who looked like me. And so like I could become the common focal point to be
You target. Yeah.
So so that's when we moved to Chappaqua. And a big part of it was because like my mom was afraid that I was gonna get irreparably hurt. And she was like, we gotta change something, we gotta change it now.
Wow.
I mean, I remember there was a time like I had this friend Chris, and so I used to go hang out with him every weekend. And so he was like a few of the condominium units away from the building that we lived in. So I used to go on Sundays. He and his dad. It was him and his dad. I don't remember what happened with his mom, but like they shared a bed because like it was a studio condo. Like these are people who are trying to figure things out, right? In this area that we were living in. So I remember one day, and I like I said, I used to go to his apartment all the time. So one day I'm walking over and I'm like maybe like 100 yards away from his door, and 3 people surround me.
Wow.
One of them was the person who was like a year older than me. It was his older brother. And then there was another guy who was in my grade. And they had been tracking me. They had been paying attention to like when I would go over to go hang out with Chris. So they surround me and they're like, I think I was in 3rd grade when this happened. And they say, get down on your knees, kiss the ground, and we'll let you go. And if you don't, we're going to beat the shit out of you.
Wow.
And so I did. And when that happened, when I made that decision, I decided I was never going to make that decision ever again. I wish I had taken the beating. I wish I had taken the beating. And that like, and it's funny because like my parents didn't know about that. I told them about it like a couple of months ago, and they were like, what the fuck? Like, that happened. But like, what I'll say is I think the cruelty of children is very casual, but that doesn't mean it's not deep.
Yeah.
And like, I think about that a lot. I have a lot of friends who have kids in different ages. And I think about like, I notice and I think about and I see how unintended consequences of people's actions and othering, how like othering can become second nature, even though you don't realize that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And like, that moment was very formative for me. And that's a big part of why like Robin Hood became a part of my identity. I'm like, no, I'm gonna take it on the chin. And you are going to be an ugly person when you do it, not me. And I would rather you be ugly than me be a coward.
Wow. What a choice at, 8 or 9 years old, right? Have to make that choice. I'm sorry to your 8 or 9-year-old self. I'm so sorry to but how many kids go through that kind of experience, right? At a very young age, right?
A lot.
So then what was it like when you got to Chappaqua? Was it better?
Sure. Chappaqua was interesting because I remember it was better in the sense of like physically it was better, but mentally the game got higher. So like a big part of the move came twofold. One of it was the violence. The second was I had this teacher in 3rd grade. His name was Mr. Durant. I was, like I said, I was in ESL. And so when I joined his class, he was like, I don't know why the hell this kid is in like, kind of the lower end of whatever. So he was like, okay, no, you're special. You need to be in the higher kind of tier, whatever you want to call it. And so he would tell my parents all the time, your kid is smarter than everybody here and he's bored and you need to go to a place that helps him realize his potential. And if you don't, you're not going to like what you see. You're not going to like what happens. Like he's too brilliant to be bored like this. Boredom does not become positivity. Like boredom at this age can become bad things. So my mom took that and the violence were part and parcel. She was like, okay, like you got to help my kids out. And my sister's one of those people, like she taught herself how to read by watching my mom teach me how to read. Like she's smarter than me. So like, so all of that to say that getting to Chappaqua, what was interesting was like, we thought it would be better. And it was in terms of physical stuff, but like the mind games were just worse because there's a lot of privilege in Chappaqua. And so like, I don't think I got into I got into one physical altercation in Chappaqua, and even then it was pathetic. There was no like grit in terms of actual violence, but the othering was much more mental. And that was not so great. But what I will say is that like in Chappaqua, in hindsight, it's just so interesting how I think there's a lot of shrillness in a lot of the kids that are going through the school. And I think part of it is they're in this bubble, and this bubble is very pretty. And there's proximity to the city, but like you can opt into that. You don't have to like actually deal, right? White Plains is one of the main stops off the Metro North. Almost everyone is commuting back and forth. You want to go get an interesting meal, you're going to go to Mount Vernon or Bronx. That's what's going to happen. Right. So I think the shrillness came from a sense of privilege, but I also felt that the shrillness in hindsight, I feel came they felt isolated. They're like, what are we doing here? Like, who are we? So that was an interesting thing. And then in Chappaqua, obviously, at the time, I think I remember like there are all these articles about the Chappaqua Central School District being one of the best in the country and all these shenanigans. And so there was I remember the heat getting turned on in terms of academics. And I started at Grafflin. That was the primary school in 5th grade. And I remember like the teachers and principal telling my parents that, you sink or swim. And
wow.
Yeah. And like, I'm like, kid, I'm just afraid, like, calm down.
Wow.
But it was, what I'll also say is that Chappaqua is how, it's in Chappaqua that I learned like who I really am, because I was not in physical survival mode all the time. And because there's this more of like this haute couture kind of vibe, like, oh, I'm going to go to Susan Lawrence and get a tiramisu and, like PLA, it actually helped put my dad into check a lot. where like he would behave more, and there was more
Interesting.
like there was just less like random outbursts and like just
Wow.
acting out. And so like our family took on more of a, we want to be better.
Oh, that's
We
interesting.
want we want to embody the American dream.
Wow.
And at that around that time is when my mom started working much more closely with my father in his business, and my mom's brilliant, so like things started to take off.
And what business were they in?
Yeah, so my dad started a franchise with Jackson Hewitt Tax Service. So it used to be a tax prepared HR block. My mom, she wanted to do textile design and fashion work and even like some of the chemistry behind like dyes and all that. That's what she was studying in India. And then she came out here. Long story short, she wasn't allowed to do any of that. She was turned into a seamstress more or less. And then eventually my dad was like, okay, I have this brilliant wife and like my business is not taking off. Let me see if she can help. And then like all of a sudden he started making a lot more money within a year of like moving to Chappaqua. But before that, so my dad was a preparer for H&R Block, and before then he used to work in a flea market. My grandparents used to sell stuff that my grandmother's brother in England, he used to make wholesale clothes. So they used to sell the stuff in flea market.
Wow. So, okay, so you end up in Chappaqua, and Chappaqua, at best, is a mixed bag, right? Your physical safety is enhanced, emotional safety is more at risk, probably. You've got the intensity of this place that is, trying to, maintain its reputation as a place of quote unquote rigor, even at the elementary school level, right? There's intense academic competition. But maybe a greater ability to figure out who you are and who you're trying to become. And then you're in middle school when 9/11 happens, right?
Yes, 8th grade.
So what was that like for you? Because I think, like, thinking back, there are layers to it, right? I mean, there's the layer of like being an American and that happening, right? And then there's being someone who lives in New York, right? And just outside of the city. And I remember what that was like for a lot of us, most of us, just the proximity to it, right? And there were people in the community in Chappaqua who lost loved ones. Faculty members who did as well. But then there's also, I remember like maybe the first incident of kind of racism and bigotry right after 9/11, it might have been like 9/11 itself or 9/12, was someone who was
in Arizona.
Right? So can you talk about those layers? What was it like for you? And again, think about like they say that our id gets created in our brain, our sense of self around 11, 12, 13. Well, there you are. You're at that age. And maybe you were a little bit more advanced in terms of creating your sense of self, but like that's a pretty huge thing to happen at that time. So talk us through that, Ben.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting emotional thinking about the teacher.
It's okay. Take your time.
So I was in science, and the teacher was Robert Gross. And I think I had him in 6th grade, yes. And then 7th grade, I had a different teacher, and then 8th grade, had him again. And I adored this man. I remember him talking to us about how I think he was dyslexic, and how it took a long time for people around him to realize that. Clearly the teachers had been talking about it. So he's in the middle of the lesson. There's an announcement made. He turns out the lights and he just stands in the side of the classroom next to the door with his arms held like this down below. And he's just letting the principal say whatever the principal's saying. They're like, hey, there's rumors of something that's happened in New York City. And we're going to have everybody go home. And I mean, nobody knew what the hell was going on. It was just like, okay, something may have happened and we're all going to go home now. So there's an element of like, oh, we get a half day, right? And then there's also an element of like what the actual hell is going on right now. And it was very clear that he and the teachers had been told not to say anything until, like further notice. So then the next couple of days were a bit of a blur because no one really knew what to say. No one really knew what was going on. But, I think it only took a couple of days for Osama bin Laden to be, to be talked about and kind of like start popping into the zeitgeist, all that. And, like the shock period was so interesting to me because in hindsight, I felt this in the moment, but I didn't have words for it. I was like, I'm American, but did you really think this couldn't happen to us? Like, I was incensed. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, being American doesn't save you. Being American didn't save me from being beaten up pretty much every day that I went to school in the morning for the first formative years of my life. I grew up with a lot of casual and then intense cruelty. And so like, I was just like, let's talk about what happens now rather than being shocked that this happened to you. Then it took a couple of months. And that's when the hatred really started to come out of not even hatred, just like people acting out. I think kids felt that they had a good reason to be shitty. Like, we're about to get full of hormones. Some of us already have our hormones raging. It's like people want a reason to do mean and say and do mean things. And so it got increasingly difficult. And then I remember I was in, I was later on in 8th grade. So AOL Instant Messenger was still a thing. Was in its heyday, one might say. And so you could get a free website with it. So you could just put stuff. So I made a website where I made fun of all the people who were tormenting me and made me feel like other. And like for every single person who was on the list, of which there were many, like, I knew their Achilles heel. So like, I would just make fun of the thing that no one was willing to say about them. So I would say it. And so then someone finds a site, they print it out, kids come to school, they're all irate. The parents come to school, they're all irate. So my parents get called in and the principal's like, this is not all right. So they have me talk to social worker. And I don't even know if she's alive anymore, but she's definitely retired. And so I walk in and she says, I just want to let you know right now, they asked for you to make fun of them because of what they were doing to you. So like, I don't think you have a problem. I'm sorry that this is what it took for people to hear that you were being tormented, and this is where you needed to go. And my God, God bless her.
Wow.
Like, I don't know what she read in my body language because she had never spoken to me before.
Wow.
But she just saw it, right? She just saw it. And she was like, we're going to talk a couple of times over the next couple of weeks because that's what needs to happen. And I have no intention of punishing you. You doled out a punishment that those kids needed to get in some way, and they weren't getting it, and so it built up. Wow. And like, I trust that you're not going to violate this trust by me telling you this right now, Meharban. And that, like, I don't know, it gave me a sense of agency. I was like, okay, I get to decide how I feel about people's responses to me. And I get to respond to those. I get to respond to it. I don't just have to put up with it.
All right. So you're Greeley. And tell me about like where things were at that point in terms of like starting to think about like, where am I headed here? Like, because that's at Greeley.
Yeah.
Again, for listeners who don't know it, it's, quote unquote, high achieving high school in an affluent suburb of New York. And it's all about getting you into the best college you can go to. That's really what drives a lot of the culture there. And so it's very forward looking. It's not about what's your experience here so much. It's about to what extent do you feel like you were living with intentionality about your high school experience, and then how did that experience inform where you wanted to go next and how you were starting to think about yourself as an emerging adult?
Yeah. To start, I did not live with intentionality in terms of like where I was going for 2.5 years at Greeley. It took a relationship I had in my sophomore year to get me out of that, to get me on a path that made sense for me. But before I give the details of that, because like there's some other very interesting things that happened with respect to the institution of Greeley because of that journey. There are some family dynamics and some things that had happened in my family itself that really put a scarlet letter on my mother, my sister, and me. And so within the Sikh community, we were ostracized. Oftentimes what happens in Indian culture, and I can't speak for others because I only came from Indian culture, is the sins of the husband are projected onto everybody else. So there was a lot of othering within our own community. It was not a community. My sister and I grew up pretty much alone for the most part. And my mom tried, but people would tell their kids not to socialize with us, not to talk to us for things that had nothing to do with us. And so like we dealt with a lot of shame and a lot of like pushing away from all corners. And when I started high school, so like I said, I'm a very spiritual man, and like there are mediums on both sides of my family, and like I have gifts. And we can have a whole other conversation about that another time, but there was a huge part of my karmic journey as a soul that was playing out. And I know I've lived multiple lives. I have memories from some of these lives. And I wouldn't say that I had a rage, but I had an animosity towards being judged without being known. And so I came into high school and I just wanted to eschew all of the trappings. And so like I was on a spiral for the first 2 years. I was actually on a spiral. My mom's sister's husband had committed suicide when I was at the end of 8th grade in India. And so like her family dynamic was in this very weird place. And like my cousins on my dad's side of the family, as much as I wanted to connect with them, I could not connect with them because of this stupid stigma. There were people on his side of the family that really wanted to know my mother, like one of my aunts who passed away when I was in sophomore year in college. She really wanted to know my mother, but my mother was afraid to like talk to her lest there be violence because of her talking to someone that was not on the same side of whatever was going on. And so like I felt like nobody was serving me. And again, this is in hindsight. In the moment, I had just had this seething animosity, and I'm like, fucking be better. I just had this like be better, right? Like mentality towards everyone around me, because I was just over it. And so like I was on this spiral for the first 2 years, and like I was not doing well. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was definitely bored as well. So like being angry and being bored are an awful combination, especially as a teenager, I think. Right. Bad shit happens when you're angry and bored. So because boredom is a vacuum and anger is an unfillable void. So like these things just like they just like in a weird way they magnify each other. It's like you make a wormhole. And so then sophomore year. So yeah, so like I was partaking in relationships that were not good for me. And then my mom tried to talk to me about it. I didn't listen to her. And then she had my dad talk to me about it. And the irony was that my dad talking to me about it is what helped, because I was like, I don't really want to be like you.
Wow.
And so for him to tell me, I didn't say this to him, but I'm thinking for him to be like, hey, you're going too far. I was like, shit, I'm going too far.
If he thinks I'm going too far, I'm going too far. Yeah.
And like this person who never knew how to be a parent and, still is figuring it out today, which I appreciate. But like back then it was like, no idea how to be a parent. So I was like, okay, I gotta cut and regroup and reset. So I make this decision, and then there's a girl, and she was a year ahead of me, and we met each other one day. I forgot what class it was, and it was just like we just both started blushing, even though we didn't say anything to each other. It was just like, okay, and I'm like, oh, so this is how it goes. So I did not know at the time that she was in a relationship. I did not know. So we start getting closer, and then and she was in like BC calculus. She was in all the highfalutin classes, and here I am in like the middle. And I think sophomore year is when I had you for Eurociv, if I'm not mistaken.
That would have been fantastic.
Yeah. Before I get to her, I want to pay homage to something that I talked to you on the phone about a while ago. I think it's important for this to be on the podcast, because that was one of the most formative things, when you were angry at me for not doing my best on an essay. And you gave us an essay. I wrote it. I half-assed it. And you gave it to me the next day, and you gave me an I for incomplete. And like, your eyebrows were doing the thing that Steve Walker's eyebrows do when he's mad. Exactly. And you gave it back to me, and you said, I'm angry because you can do better than this and you chose not to. So go do what you're capable of, and I will grade it when you give me what you're capable of. And that shit, that set the stage for like who I am as a mentor and who I am as a professional. Like, real talk, that set the stage. Be better does not mean you don't, like, be better does not come without context. When you tell someone be better, it should be because you understand their potential and they understand their potential. If they don't understand their potential, you need to make them see it and then say, now go realize it. If you just say be better because you see someone's potential and they don't, that's not helpful. And I saw, like, you are an alchemist, Mr. Walker. Like, I saw it. I saw you do it. You chose to teach Eurociv when I think you could have taught as many APs as you wanted to. I remember feeling that you chose to not be on the quote unquote higher tier because you didn't think that's where most of the work was. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. I mean, I think I felt both like that those courses, the AP courses, are not, first of all, they're not real college, right? It's not real rigor, and constrain you so much that you were limited in terms of what you could do to help kids really grow and stretch intellectually. And that at that point, they were very much, self-selected, the 4.0 kids, and wanted to work with a broader range of kids as well. And have the flexibility to teach in a way that I knew would be great for everybody.
And there's so much grace in that, and I thank you for it. And I hope that you've been told thank you in many ways over the years because you deserve it.
Thank you.
So back to this person. So I start mingling with her and her friends, and like they're all the smart kids. And I remember, like, she said to me one day, I think you're bored. You don't getting good grades doesn't mean you've given into the man. It's just like you can have a good challenge, and not, be a slave to the system. And she, yeah, like she didn't say it exactly that way, but it was not that far off. And so I was like, shit, she's right. So then I was like, okay, first things first, I got to get into the higher math because I was bored in the math that I was in. That much was clear. So I started doing this search. I don't know how I found this tutor. It was the earlier days of the internet. So I found this PhD student at Columbia University who was in mathematical finance and reached out to him. His name is Jeffrey. And so I started getting tutored by him on the weekends. So I would get driven to Columbia on the weekends to learn pre-calculus and then eventually calculus 1. So my plan was I was going to get tutored and then I was going to ask to take a test to place into the higher math course. So I do this for like 4 or 5 months. So then, and I remember I used to be in the library and I would be doing my pre-algebra or my algebra, and then I would like take out the textbook for calculus and do calculus. And I was just like, okay, of course, like I have to dark horse this, which is going to be relevant to when we start talking about my career, because dark horsing opportunities for myself has been a theme, unfortunately. So then eventually I talked to he tells me, he kind of gives me the blessing. He's like, okay, thou art a calculus 1 student by Columbia University standards. Go forth and do thy bidding. My God, he was so sweet. He would tutor me on the weekends instead of just doing his own thing. He was so generous. I'm still in touch with him. And so then I go to the head of the math department at the time and I ask her if I can place in. And she says something to the effect of, people like you don't just get to pick when they want to do better. Like, you placed into a certain math track, you had your opportunity, you had your chance, and I just don't feel like writing a test for you. I remember literally her saying, I just don't feel like writing a test for you.
No.
And then she said, if you bring your parents in here, I'll give them all the great excuses so that they believe me that this is not possible. So my parents did go in. And she said the things. So then I go back and I tell the tutor, and he's like, well, fuck that shit. You're taking Calc 2 here at Columbia. So then he got me enrolled as a student. I had a badge, I had an ID and everything. So I would go after school 2 days a week. I would get driven to Columbia and then I would take the class because it was an evening class, and I would come back at like 9 o'clock at night. Yeah. And then this, so like, while I'm now on this, I'm on this trajectory and I feel a sense of purpose and I feel a direction. I realized also in that time that I really liked physics, and physics was not my strongest subject, but I liked it. And so like that nuance I'm proud of myself for being able to hold that nuance as a teenager, because I think it's really hard. It's really easy to get dejected, be like, that's not for me, screw it, right? But I genuinely enjoyed it. And like, you remember Mr. Bianchi, you and Miss Santini, my favorite teachers. No.
What was it about physics that you liked so much? What was it that grabbed you early on?
What I like about physics is that it requires faith. You cannot actually feel electromagnetism, but it does things.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but it like really resonated with the spiritual person in me.
It's interesting. And
I think that there's a chasm between faith and trust. I want to say that too. You can have faith, but trust is earned. And like there's a journey there. So I had faith that like I liked the subject, and I liked that it challenged me to couch things that I could not literally validate with my hands in math. And it was like, what was the point of this scripture, mathematics, if it can't encapsulate things that you can't see? Like, there was a very natural tautology in my head about that. And it sounds a little weird. It sounds esoteric, I think, but like, it makes perfect sense to me. Of like these, like the language of mathematics is exactly that. Even now, as a professional, I believe mathematics should be used. It should not be revered. And a lot of people I work with, they tell me, Meharban, you're a mathematician more than you're an engineer. And I'm like, are you saying it because I'm brown? They're like, no. Like, you talk in math, and then the people around you understand why the math is useful. And therein lies the rub. So there was a big part of that there. And I also liked that these theories, like physics, is elemental, but it's also constrained. Like, you get down to fundamental quanta of things. I hated chemistry because it was rules of thumb, and I hate rules of thumb because if I can't unravel it, I will not understand it. And so physics is fundamental, but it's also like those pieces mean nothing if you don't put them together.
Yeah.
Who cares about a quark? No one cares about a quark. A bunch of quarks making a nucleus is what matters. Because like with a proton and a neutron, which the quarks make up, that's how you make elements. A quark on its own is it's actually nothing. There is no quark on its own. It exists within a proton or a neutron or an electron. So yeah, like that's it was very appealing. I liked how hard it was to hold. And like, to get a little woo for a second, like, for example, my astrological chart, my Mars is in Aquarius, meaning the way I deal with conflict is to round it out and to like be aloof and be like, you think this is a fight, and it's just a game. And so like, it really appeals to me, where it's like, kind of like, I'm here, but I'm not here at the same time.
Oh, that's so interesting. Wow. So in some ways, like, there are so many layers to that, right? In some ways, there's this like, it helps answer some existential questions about the unknown world and universe, right? So there's that spiritual piece to it. On the other hand, like, it's a very concrete, like, hey, this is the application of math, and math helps us understand how these things work. And there's kind of like laws that you can then observe, right? And the math helps do that and explain it. And so there's a very concrete piece to it as well. And then it's a metaphor for you of some of the kind of qualities of human existence and relationships and conflict and all that. That's fascinating. Wow, that is unbelievable. I think, I've always been fascinated by physics. I never took it, which is ironic. I even helped come up with the framework for a physics and chemistry course in the life school. Because I wanted kids to be able to take the course that I always wish I'd been able to take.
Right.
But
That sounds like you.
Right. I've always been fascinated by it, just because to me, it is on that existential level of like, how does all this work? Like, why is all this here? And to me, that's fascinating. And so for me, like, I think that almost, like, as you put it, an almost spiritual nature to it. I think that's what it speaks to me. It's fascinating. Okay, so you realize you're in high school, all this stuff has happened to you, right? And I appreciate you for being so vulnerable and honest and authentic, sharing all that. It's not easy, I know. And you're realizing, like, oh, I got this thing for physics. Wow, this is like multi-dimensional thing that I'm fascinated by. So how did you figure out where you wanted to go to college and making that decision.
Sure.
And then that was an engineering path, right? So
Right. So, okay. So the honing of college related to something else as well, which was I was in a band. End of junior year and then through senior year, I was a vocalist in a death metal band.
I
And
remember that.
of course you do.
There's the anger piece. I get it.
There's the anger piece. I was getting into, like, I was into metal and all this stuff. So there was a metal band that was one of the bigger metal bands in our school. Air quotes. And then like they fell apart, and then my sister recorded me just like screaming into a microphone one day, and then gave the recording to someone that got someone else into it. They were like, "Oh, you should be like part of our band because we don't have a vocalist." And I remember the first show that I played with them, like the day before, they were like, "Yeah, our vocalist decided he doesn't want to play the show." I was like, "Well, shit, okay." So then I practiced with them, and then we went. It was in the freaking cafeteria because that's where all best bands start. And next to where the freaking sandwich bar was. I remember I got on the stage and everybody thought that I was a tech because I wear a turban and I'm brown. And when I started screaming into the microphone, there was a look of, wait, hold on. Oh, wait, he's actually the vocalist. And there was that seething again. And there was this very interesting interplay where like I found myself, and I hid the fact that I was in a metal band, that I was in a from my parents, and eventually they found out like years later, after I was in college. Because like oftentimes I would like headbang, my turban would come off and my hair would be all over the place, and like that's a no in Sikhism. No culturally. I think like in truth, like it's more of a cultural thing. That Sikhism is not a dogmatic faith. But I found this like intoxicating interplay where I was like, I get to be, I'm in charge when I'm on that stage. And like people used to reflect, the kids that used to come to the shows used to reflect, I don't know, man, it hits different when you're doing it versus when other bands are doing it. And I remember some people were like, they were talking about the band one day, and this happened a few times where people would talk about the band and they'd say, yeah, there was this like really, really crazy person from like Ossining that was like fronting this band. And I was like, that was me. They're like, no, it's not. I'm like, that was me. They're like, no, like it didn't look like you. It didn't sound like you. It could not have been you. I'm like, is this a shirt that person was? See, I have this shirt. That was me. And I felt like there was this interesting, I got to live I got to look like I was living in two different worlds, but they were the same world for me, where I have a rigor and a vigor when I'm doing science. It's let's figure this out so we can figure out more things. And that translated into the art as well, where it was like, let's get to it. This is not about sounding like a technically proficient, metal, solo. This is about like, I'm going to get straight to where you are because that's where I am too. And like, I just want us to see each other. Let's just see each other. Yeah. And I felt like I was not rid of, but I felt like I was separated from the, you are this because you look like this, because you came from this, because your ancestor is by the Asing, one of the five beloved. So then I started thinking about colleges, and I didn't have a lot of support. None of the people in my family who had, like, none of my cousins who were older were encouraged to support me in any way. I asked for help. I didn't get any. But I was like, all right, I want to go for physics. So I applied to a bunch of different schools, and I applied to every college except for the University of Southern California as a physics major. At USC, I applied as an engineering major. To this day, it was on a whim. I don't know why that's what I chose, but that's what I chose. I have no idea why.
Wow.
That's where my finger went. I applied, and I was waitlisted at a few different places. And so I'm talking to my mom when I get the USC acceptance, and she says, "You need to leave." And she's like, she has tears in her eyes as she's saying this. Like, my mother and I are very close, and like we had repaired, and we were moving through it. So I asked her why. She said, "If you stay here, you're going to be the man you think you're supposed to be, and you will resent us for it.
Wow.
Because you will just keep on taking care of everybody.
Wow.
So you need to go." That doesn't happen with Indian parents from that generation.
Right.
That is anathema. She
Yeah.
got so much shit for it. To this day, I spent half my life in Los Angeles, 18 years. People still have the nerve to ask her, "Why'd you let him go? / when is he coming back?" And she's like, "Steffu, I don't have to be in this conversation anymore."
Mm-hmm.
But she got so much shit from her own family, from my dad's
Sure.
family, from everybody and their goddamn mother.
Your mom saw that the underlying thing that you needed to, in a way, protect yourself against as you were becoming an adult was your tendency to want to take care of everybody and to make other people happy, including perhaps by not becoming the person you were meant to be. And that in order to break free from that, you had to get physical distance.
Yep.
That's pretty powerful, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I said I have one god of a parent.
Yeah, right? Pretty amazing. Well,
So she wasn't even allowed to do any of that stuff growing up. She grew up in India.
Right.
She's an attractive young woman. She wasn't even allowed to play sports.
Yeah.
And she was great at sports. So like she this was all of her parenting was a response to how she was parented.
Yeah, of course, right off of this. Wow. Okay, so you go off to USC.
Yeah.
What were those 4 years like?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it started.
like what's
Yeah.
It's like the Reader's Digest. Like what?
Yeah. Technically, I hate circuits. I don't like a lot of electrical engineering fundamentals because it was rules of thumb.
Yeah.
Hey, when you have a capacitor and a resistor and an inductor and they're in this kind of a thing, you use these equations. But we're in this state, you use these equations. Now do the algebra. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Wait, what? It's different depending on what? And I struggled. I struggled a lot. And then my sophomore year, I had a break. I had a mental break.
Mm-hmm.
I think spiritually there was a lot of, without getting into it too much, there was a lot of intentions from different aspects of my spiritual makeup.
Mm-hmm.
All of that world that wanted me to go in a certain direction, and I was resisting it because that wasn't me. I was trying to figure out what I was interested in, and everything felt unattainable. I felt like I couldn't retain anything. I felt like I couldn't learn anything. I felt like I couldn't, I wasn't able to, like, I would write things down. I would look at a board and be like, I don't know how to do that. Like I could know how to do it, but I did not know how to do it. I'd leave the class and be like, I have no idea how to do this. Sometimes like things that like math that I was able to do when I was in high school, like I'd just be like, I don't know how to do this. So I think there was a spiritual aspect, and there was also a mental aspect of like, I had the bends in a way, right? I had the emotional bends. And then it didn't help that this thing I chose to do, electrical engineering, was not coming to me. And so then like I spiraled. I was a Dean's List student for the first year or so, year and a half, and then like it just started spiraling. And then on a whim, I took a class in communication theory. It was a communication systems class. So like you didn't get into the low level physics of it all at first, but it was like designing a system that used wireless communications. And the guy who taught it was a technical fellow, still is at JPL.
Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Right.
Right. Yes. And he was a part-time professor. And man, I was like, shit, I know how to do this. This is cool. I'm good at this. And there were concepts that started coming up as the course went on that were adjacent and that were just literally physics. You have an analog to digital converter. You have an analog signal that hits this thing. The temperature at the antenna affects the noise floor, and there's a Gaussian distribution, and the particles go in this way and that way. I was like, this is physics. This is physics. It's physics manifest as a product. This is fucking great. And so I took this course, rocked it, and I felt like I found the thing. So then, so this was my second semester junior year. But then I had like a 2.7 GPA. And I was, and I remember like a year before, I went to a career fair. By then I was not at 2.7, I was at 3.4. I went to a career fair. SpaceX was there. This is when SpaceX hadn't done anything yet. And I go and I give my resume, and the recruiter literally laughs at me, like on the floor laughing at me in front of the entire line of people. And he says, yeah, I'll take your resume, but you're not really SpaceX material. And I was like, okay. So I just forgot about them. Actually forgot about them. So I take this class, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta like take another year probably of undergrad so I can have 2 GPAs. I'll have the normal GPA, and then I'll have a GPA, which is all the higher upper division courses. Because I was like, I'm going to take the courses that are in between graduate and high level undergrad, and I want to take at least 10 of those and say like my GPA here is like a 3.738. So like I'm not an idiot, I promise. So I did that with communications and then digital signal processing. And when I got into signal processing, I was like, okay, this is it. And the funny thing is, the math that goes into signal processing actually helps couch a lot of things in circuits. So like I said before, math being used to explain things you can't touch.
Yeah.
So because I was getting into the nitty gritty of like, what is a digital filter? It's like, how do you make a digital filter that compensates for an analog impairment? You have to make an analog approximation. So you have to end up understanding the circuit through a mathematical lens. But I had no internship experience because of the spiral and all that. Like no place was giving me internship experience. I did research 1 semester in the summer. And like that was the only experience I had on paper. So 4 years went by like that. I made all of my actual lifelong friends in college. And that is what the 4 years were mostly about. It was about one of my best friends, her name is Christina. So one day she's talking to me, and she says, I'm a firm believer that we choose our family. And that stuck with me.
Yeah.
That stuck with me. And so I formed, and people let me in to their families in all these different ways, and they were so patient with me. I didn't know how to hug people. I remember like, because Indians, in most typical Indian families, hugging is not a thing. Or if you do, it's a side hug. That's like a high, and then you kind of like allergic reaction, push the person away. And she was one of the people that taught me how to hug.
Wow.
And now she says when I hug her, it's like she went to the chiropractor.
You learned well.
Yeah. So there was I think I learned the power of grace in relationships of all kinds at USC.
Yeah, that's
Because I think college, especially in places like that, it's just high school again, except it's bigger. And they lie to you about them paying attention to you. Because in high school, you actually do get paid attention to more than you do in college, especially in big ones. And so feeling like a minnow in this huge ocean, grace and the power of really choosing family. And, USC was also a lot about, I remember my mom said to me one day, she said, I'm learning things about how to handle your dad and your sister and just people in my life because you're not here to protect and by protecting, get in the way. We're all learning and stretching. And it's because you're not here. It's not like I'm saying good riddance, but there's a mind. Yeah, it's good for anybody.
And you weren't enabling. You weren't getting in the way of some discomfort. Discomfort is often the path to growth, right?
Exactly.
People are being saved or protected from the discomfort because there's somebody in the family who's the smoother and the protector and go between and all that, and, right? Everybody can kind of stay set in their ways.
So I did another year. And then I applied to the master's program because I was like, I need to get a master's in order for me to look attractive for jobs. In between that time, there was a family friend who got me a connection to get an internship at this random telecom company in Colorado. And when I started talking to them, his business partner was like, hey, why don't you talk to SpaceX? And so SpaceX comes again. And I'm like, what? He's like, I know someone there. Long story short, they were both full of crap. But they put it in my head.
So what year was this?
This was 2011.
So how long had SpaceX existed at that point?
SpaceX had existed since 2002. It's been 9 years.
Okay, so it's been 9 years.
Yeah.
So it's interesting also, I just want maybe an observation. We make it seem as if there's a race to figure all this shit out, right? Adults are constant, mostly because adults don't know how to talk to kids. They talk about the one thing that they know they're supposed to talk about, or they think they're supposed to talk about, which is college, right? And what do you want to be when you grow up? And it puts all this pressure and expectation on kids to like, oh my God, at a young age, you got to figure all this shit out. And it's true, right?
No.
I mean, I'm on my 4th career now, right? So I'm still figuring it out. And I'll figure it out at some point. Right? But here you are, right? And you could say that maybe it was more difficult because you had all these really challenging things grow up, but you're someone who was probably more self-aware because of that stuff, had a greater sense of agency and wanting to have agency in your life. Did one of the things that kids are told like you're supposed to do, which is find your passion, which is bullshit because so many people don't, right? Never find their passion. Or it's not work related. But you're like, you kind of following like physics, like, holy crap, like that, this is really awesome. You kind of for no known reason, applying to the one school where you end up going to not be a major in that, but something that's adjacent, but not that, which is engineering, right? You go into electrical engineering, and it turns out here you are, you don't get that. That's not an easy path for you, and it's not a good match for you. But through taking 1 or 2 courses kind of late in the game, you then stumble upon, holy crap, this is what's going to make it happen for me, because now I see the application in the real world of the thing that I kind of was jazzed about in high school. Stumbling onto your path. And I want to observe that because it's one of the things I started this podcast for, was to help people see that like everybody's just trying to figure it out. Like very few people know at the age of like 10, like I'm going to be a dentist. And that's what they're going to be. And 50 years later, they're a friggin' dentist, and that's all they've done their whole life. God bless that person.
Uh-huh.
That's not most people.
No.
Right? Okay. So now the SpaceX bug keeps getting in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking grad school.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So, by this point, like I told you, my dad's a whiz with the stock market. So I had a stock portfolio that was started when I was quite young, and it had amassed quite a bit of money. And he said, liquidate it, buy property. And so we bought a condo in downtown Los Angeles. And there's one thing I want to acknowledge before I go on. I left college completely debt free.
Wow.
Because my parents paid for it. My mother made sure that whatever politics we had in the house, that both of her kids' educations were taken care of. No muss, no fuss.
Wow.
So I'm very fortunate and I'm very privileged to have that. And I recognize the power of that, because there's so much that I would not have been able to, given myself permission to explore in my life if I had to deal with debt.
Right? Game changing.
Yeah. So
I mean, you went to Greeley, which for all its faults that you pointed out, it's still,
sets you up. It sets you up.
Sets you up, right? Prepares you well. Came out with skills, right? You had these phenomenal teachers, especially your European civilization woman. But really, Bianchi, if you think about Bianchi and the impact that he had and your love of physics and that whole path, that's a phenomenal impact of a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then be able to go to USC and then, like you said, graduating debt free and starting off with being able to liquidate investments, condo in LA, like that. You were ahead of 99% of the people on the planet probably at that point, right?
Yes.
Good point.
So, on paper,
right. And that's, and then you did not have the privilege of being white and being free from all harassment, discrimination, bullying. Well, that you did not have that privilege.
Right.
Had the financial thing on paper was right.
So, yep. So the person who was the broker for the condo, very well connected man in Los Angeles, and he really cared about me. And so like we stayed in touch, and my mom suggested, she was like, hey, so I know that these people were full of shit about SpaceX. So why don't you reach out to Russell? Russell, he knows so many people.
What?
And I was like, okay. Yeah. I was like, let me reach out to Russell. He's like, oh, I just helped a guy from SpaceX find an apartment to live in 2 weeks ago. Let me email him.
Wow.
So this happens when I come back from my co-op in Colorado in the summer. So I come back, and then she suggests this, and I talk to Russell, and then he gets me in touch. And then that guy's like, well, I'm not an EE, but I know electrical engineer in the radio frequency RF department, which is the kind of stuff I would want to do. And so he gets me in touch with that guy, who I'm still friends with today. And he talks to his manager, and his manager is like, oh yeah, we need someone like this. And then like, that's how it all happens.
Wow.
That's how it all happens. And Ben is the name of the person who was on the department I eventually joined. He was so patient with me. He's only 2 years older than me, but he was so sweet and so accommodating. And like, he didn't use his position to kind of like haze me or make me feel like I was at his mercy. It was very like, well, okay, I guess like this makes sense. You seem like a cool guy. Let's get you in talks with these people and see if it works. And I really like, he and I are very similar in that way, where we're very taught in our technical communication, but we are present. And you can be taught and be present. They're not mutually exclusive. So then I had an interview, and they were like, hell yeah, I'm in my first semester of grad school. And then I get a call saying, can you start in January? And so that's how it all started. So I started in January, I take a leave of absence from school for 9 months. Started up again following autumn. But in those 9 months, I started the co-op, and like, it was pretty crazy. Um, in those 9 months, because I started in January of 2012, in May is when SpaceX made it to the space station for the first time.
Wow.
I was there. I was
Wow.
there. I had been there for 3 days, sleeping under my desk. And I'll tell you, like, humble glee is the best kind.
Yeah.
It's the best kind. Like, it is the closest I think anyone will ever get to being a child, when their joy comes from a place of humility.
And what made it, I can imagine, but what made it a place of humility, right? Because you can imagine that a lot of people would be like, oh, all these like wicked smart people working for Elon Musk, right? And the ego that comes with him.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be this bunch of like egomaniac brainiacs, right? Who are all just like, you know, fist pumping, and they're just full of themselves. But I can imagine how it would actually be a place of humility. What made it a place of humility for you?
Yeah. Two things. One, in the department that I was in, it was two women who were mostly running the show. And I think that went a long damn way.
Wow.
They were tough. Let me make that abundantly clear. But they knew how to keep the interstitial copacetic. And I think like they had failed enough times. Like the Falcon 1 had enough awkward failures. There were enough people saying no, this is not possible. And like when I joined, it had, I think getting to the space station was already almost 2 years late.
Right.
It had already been delayed by 2 years. Everybody was blue balls. Everybody. And so like at some point, I think people started to question whether SpaceX could actually do it.
Right.
And
That is, if I recall, that's the first real test of whether the privatization of the space program was going to be viable or not. Right. So, talk about all the pressure. It's on this one mission. It's already behind for 2 years. Right. And there've been these very public failures. Right. It may be the industry that's the most public in its failures. That and the airplane industry. Right. Like, wow. And so, yeah, I can imagine there's like as much of a sense of relief.
Yes.
Right. As well. And the humility, like that tempers any of the chip on the shoulder.
Yes.
It might have been there. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there was like, this came from the top, and I'm going to say from the top instead of using the name, just because I don't want to get either of us in any hot water. And I will not I'm just trying to be respectful as well. I say from the top. From the top, there was the sentiment of, I have these ridiculous ideas, and thank God you all are here so we can try them. That's how it started.
Wow.
That's how it started. And you taught Eurociv, and you were a diplomat in one of the most complicated governments in the world. You know how that kind of sentiment can turn. But that's how it started. And there was a real feeling of family. And we all know the asterisks that come with treating your work as family. So yeah, it was relief, equal parts relief as it was joy. You're right to bring up. And, I think a lot of people, all those things, the bravado and all the kind of like cockiness, like, don't get me wrong, that was there, but it wasn't there the way that it's commonplace now, but it was there because it's a defense mechanism. Let's call it what it is. A lot of these people, myself included, are people that JPL rejected, that other places in NASA rejected.
Interesting.
So, like, I didn't want to join them because I was interested in space. I wanted to work at a place that was solving hard problems with cool people. That's what I wanted to do. So like there's a real muscular vein of nihilism that you embody when like that's what you're doing. Like we were blowing a hole through the establishment. And like, yeah. So like nihilism is a part of it. Because like what happens to the world after you change it in that way? Can it function the same way again? Can it function the way it needs to again? Are we creating a sense of free fall? I don't know.
Yeah, what are you creating in that moment? I mean, that's an interesting thing, right? If you think about the space industry in particular, let's call it the first iteration of it, right? The 50s, 60s, early 70s. Like it had this dual purpose that was very clear, that was established by the U.S. government, right? Which is we have to beat the Soviet Union to the moon, and we're going to sell that to people as we're explorers, right? We're reaching for the stars, right? That romanticized part of it. And the government controlled the industry, right? Because it was all done through NASA, and then NASA had these subcontractors, right? All these different aerospace companies. Whereas what you all were doing was blowing up that model, but it wasn't clear what was going to replace it. Like, if this works, who now is going to be deciding what we do in space and why and how? How is government going to still be involved? How are these companies going to be involved? Are more companies going to emerge, or is there going to be like a victor? Like, is this a race between the 2 or 3 leading aerospace companies that are trying to get these contracts? Like that, no one knew. We still don't know. We still don't know where this thing is heading and why. Right? Here's things where some of the different principles is, oh, you go to Mars, we want to colonize Mars, we want to, whatever. But we don't, there's no single actor who gets to decide anymore. It's not NASA, it's not a president, it's not Bezos or Musk or anything. And we don't know how this is going to play out and who's going to end up having more influence as we go on. That's amazing. And is it scary being a part of that, where you're like, in a way, you're like blowing up the system, you don't know what you're replacing it with, dude. It's kind of like, let's
dude. Okay, like I think we talked a little bit about this earlier in the summer. I knew a few years in that I did not want to work for this person anymore, and my mom remembered this when I decided later on that it was time to go. And she told me that I told her, I don't like the fact that I enable this person. My presence here enables this person because I'm going to do the work and I'm going to do it well. I put this LinkedIn post about leaving SpaceX when I left in May. And so I'm going to just kind of quote something from it, which I think is important. Bending the rules. Changing the game requires bending the rules, and that should be done with temperance. And respect of the mission at hand. And so, yes, it's scary because I believe in the power of capitalism, and I understand what it means for it to be unchecked. And I also understand what it means for it to be the only thing driving. It's not anodyne. It is loaded. It has intention, which is not beholden to anyone except for a select few. And you can say the same for government, except you can elect officials. So like if I don't take part in my city, state, local elections, that's on me. Because I have power. So it scares the shit out of me. I worry about people taking liberties with what worked there and rewriting the textbook on how to do this. And then they lose track of how to do some fundamental things. And then two things come of it. One of them is people start to say things are not possible because they're too goddamn lazy to do the fucking math. Like I was told by a younger person not that long ago when I asked them to prove something was worth doing algebraically instead of just having a piece of code that did something, they said, okay, boomer. I was like, dude, Bonnie, because I asked you to do the math. Oh, like you wrote a piece of Python and I'm just accept it because you're smart. Like, show me why the algebra said that this was worth doing. And if you can't, tell me why you can't. That's okay too. So the totems that have been put out there by the top at that place sound good, and a lot of them are decent ethos. But if you start and stop there, you limit what is actually possible because you don't challenge yourself. SpaceX did something really great. It took NASA's playbook and it sped it up, which is remarkable. It's remarkable. It is remarkable. Because like making rocket engines, like that can take years, even manufacturing them, right? So like no shade there, but don't forget what you actually did. Like they were not blanking on his name. There was Frank Molina, Jack Parsons from JPL. He was the rocket engine scientist who like blew himself up because he was doing an experiment. So like Von Braun does not exist at SpaceX or any other of the new space companies today, or even in any of NASA. Like there is no modern day Von Braun, in my opinion. So let's call things what they are, and let's not take a shit on the things that got us here. Let's analyze them. Let's vivisect, and let's put them back together in the more ergonomic ways. And so my fear is that people think that that is how you make rockets fly, which is why there's been, in my opinion, not so humble opinion, only one other rocket company that's managed to do it. And even they are struggling to make their next generation of rockets because it's hard, and that company is Rocket Lab. Like if that was the formula and you took what was said in little snippets and all this stuff, we would have a plethora of new space companies. God knows, I think Congress would like to have that competition so they can pick who they can actually like, support and who would support them. So yeah, it does scare me. It does scare me. But I also think that like what I like about that vibe is that there's a premium on being effective if you really want to succeed in those places and in that place. And that has forced NASA to think about how it can be more effective, which is important. The government should be effective for its people and for the things that it's working on. It should not just exist to gatekeep. It should be effective. That's my opinion, at least.
What you mentioned Von Braun. What's missing? So was the renowned German scientist, right? Who then comes here after the war and is one of the masterminds of the NASA program, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's missing? What did he bring to the table to that generation of space development that's missing now?
Purpose. Say what you will about war. I'm not a fan of war, but war instigates eddies of purpose. Right. And I think we're grasping for what the reason to go to space is now.
Right.
Which is why it is so damn hard for anyone to get to the goddamn moon right now, even though we did it with computers that were dumber than a Casio calculator.
Right.
Because we haven't had to, so we've atrophied.
Right. Look how quickly we did, right? I mean, it's...
Seriously.
We go to the moon in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
Within 5 or 6 years, America's board and the space program basically grinds to a halt.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we went there a handful of times, and people were like, even though it was still like every time we're going, it's like, holy crap, are these guys going to get there and back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do you think for you? So you end up working there, right? And part of it is like, it's interesting that when you were talking about your journey, and we didn't hear you in high school or college or immediately after college be like, I want to be a part of us going to space and the new frontier and all that. And it was really about like, I want to work on solving sticky problems with really good people, right? Which is great. I want to note that again, because I think that's actually what many people would find to be the touchstone that would help them find the job that they want and would be good at and would enjoy. Like, the people you work with, for most people, is most of your job satisfaction. We miss that. We don't focus on that. And that speaks to corporate culture. It speaks to the kinds of people that are drawn to that company or that industry, whatever. And then the like solving sticky problems, like solving difficult problems, there's challenge involved with it. Like, that keeps you engaged, right? There's challenge and purpose behind it. Once you were there, did you develop a sense of your own purpose for us going to space? Did that become a part of your equation?
I became a caretaker again. Little backstory, and then this will explain the whole husbandry thing that I'm talking about, because it really felt like husbandry. Within 7 months of me working at SpaceX, still an intern, my mentor was pretty jealous of me and started cutting me out of meetings and conversations, because people who were working with me they used to say things like, "Oh, now that you're on this team, I know what this team is actually doing." And that would annoy him, and he felt less special. Instead of seeing me as someone who represented him really well and being an MVP, he got petty about it. And that became a big part of my experience on that team. I was on that team for about 6.5 years before I left it. Jumping ahead for a second, my best friend, Christina, she asked me when I was leaving, do you care more about the work you do or the people you work with? I said, I care more about the work I do. She said, you're lying. You're leaving because of the people. To your point, right? Of like the ethos and the people are what really matter. So I found myself in these conversations where people were shadowboxing with their feelings as if they are technical thought. And I was like, shit, I need to be the filter, because if they have their own way, they're going to make negligent decisions that are rooted in their ego, and they're going to get people hurt. And maybe some of that was like the self-righteousness of like a young STEM professional. I'm in my 20s. But as time went on, I realized how important it was that I made that decision, even though I suffered dearly for it. I was blackballed. I was kept from like promotions, and I was colored as someone who like didn't know how to work with people, because I would ask the hard questions. And so, yes, I really cared about space, but I cared about it insofar as I didn't want anyone to fuck it up. And I didn't know what it meant for it to be successful, but I knew what felt wrong. And never was I actually interested in space, though, Mr. Walker. It never like stuck.
Interesting.
It is.
You're in the midst of one of the great, like the beginning of what may end up being. I mean, who knows, but feels like the beginnings of a great, like, iteration of space exploration, right? And yet that's not that's, you weren't like fulfilling some Star Trek dream from childhood, right?
No. But you know what? Here's the thing that really grew over time. I made this vibe around me where it was okay to say, I don't know. If I was leading a project or like de facto, the kind of spiritual leader, I make it my business for it to be okay for anyone to say, I don't know. And when they say, I don't know, it's not shame on you. It's let's figure it out. What can we do to help you figure it out? What can we do to help us figure it out? And that is what I got from working at that place, because it's so stressful. There's so much ego and bravado and all the machismo, all the things you were saying before, they came more and more and more out of the woodwork. As soon as Falcon 9 landed for the first time, there was a lot of resting on laurels that came out of the woodwork. So people who were effective needed to be effective despite being told things that made no sense, things that defied physics, because management wanted to say that they would essentially say, make the physics do what I told you to do. It's like, that's not how that, we harness physics. We don't tell it what to do, bro. That's not how that works. So I found beautiful people who wanted to be effective and were of my ilk, and we found each other and we did great things. And that's what I got from SpaceX. At best, that's what I got from SpaceX. And it was interesting because, like, with all the glass ceilings and all that, at the end of the day, the reason why I got a promotion to a senior engineer is because 3 people I had worked with at 3 different times, I never complained to them about not getting a promotion, but they had been paying attention to what my role was on the company directory, and they independently, without talking to each other, in the same week, went to our admin and said, why is this man not a senior engineer? Are y'all racist or something? And they each said almost the same thing. I found out about it way, 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 way after. And that, right? Like, that is the beauty. That was the beauty in that place. And like, soul vision is exactly that. Like a solitary vision is in fact solitary. If you don't, like, Musk is an iconoclast, and like, that's fine. But like, iconoclasts live alone in everything they do. And like, there's a place for them. But cooperation, like with such singular and solitary vision, cooperation is very hard to motivate, and it's very hard to reward in a way that doesn't feel like you're compromising what you're trying to do, regardless of if your feeling of it being compromised is wrong or not. That's not really the point. So like, I really like that in a place like that, I was able to be part of family and community. Like, as you can probably hear, I'm filling in voids that I felt growing up. Right. And like, and bringing the warmth that I wish I could share with other people around me that I didn't think I could, because they didn't want it from me, with these other people. And like, we all find each other. The warmth finds other warmth. So being able to participate in iconoclastic vision while having real ethos, that was what I got from that place.
Yeah.
At best.
And that's interesting, right? Because it's almost, I wonder if it's almost inevitable that that's going to be the tension, right? That in some ways, if we're not going to have the government driving this thing anymore, right? It's going to be partially, right? But it's going to be doing it in tandem with these private actors. Then you're like, maybe it's inevitable that it's going to need these like people like Musk and Bezos, right? Who, for their own personal reasons, right? And their own vision, ideology, whatever you want to call it, are driven, right, to bring their vision to reality. And that within these companies, you're going to have an inherent tension maybe between the people like yourself and your kindred spirits who are like, look, we're going to make this happen, but we're going to do it with respect to the physics, and we're going to do it making sure that this doesn't screw up and we don't unnecessarily lose lives or anything else, right? That if you get a question, if you're not sure, like you were telling people on your team, like you asked it, right? We figure it out together. That mindset is going to be in tension, maybe inevitably, with the we've got to be first, we've got to innovate, we've got to be fast, right? We're going to, like, this is such a public, high pressure, high stakes thing that innovators are risk takers almost by nature, right? When we think about the original astronauts, they were all test pilots, right? That in some ways in the industry, isn't that the inherent tension? Hopefully you're going to end up with both types of people in your company, right? And maybe NASA was that like right mix of that. Does that make sense? Like that's
yeah. Very much so. And I actually want to pull on something that you said there, which is very interesting to me, and I was hoping we would get to this, which is in '69, there was a sense of urgency. We weren't first, but we need to be at least second. So let's be first to the moon. That had a sense of purpose. You work for an iconoclast. That's not a sense of purpose. When the iconoclast says, "I want this," that's not purpose. But the urgency sounds the same. We need to be first. It's who is we? What is the enormity of we? Is there an enormity? So, yeah. And I think you hit it right on the head. That tension is everything. Like, it's what I think it ultimately comes down to is what is the nature of motivation? And what does it mean to be motivated? And what does it mean to motivate? How you motivate is a function of the institution that you're trying to motivate.
Right.
So if you motivate by decrees, the resentment and kind of like, well, I'm going to figure out how to do this in a way that makes sense to me and a few others, like it becomes part of the game, which I did with a lot of my fears. We did it because we wanted to not just respect the problem, we wanted to respect each other. There was that as well, right? Whereas if it's coming from the government, before you left, you expressed some of this in high school when you talked about it, but before you left, you worked all the channels because you had channels to work. And it's when they didn't work, you're like, all right, bounce, we're done. Yeah, not going to do this anymore. But you had actual channels to try and promote the questions you were asking and the feedback that you had, because the government on paper is supposed to be regulated. A commercial entity chooses its own rules.
Right.
So what it means to be motivated as an employee in that kind of paradigm invariably involves fear. Even if you have a benevolent dictator as your CEO, it involves fear. And that's something I struggled with at SpaceX because it's insular, because it's, well, we have an idea of what success looks like. Yeah. It's not, okay, hold on. Is that success? Or does that feel right? There's a difference sometimes.
Right. I wonder too, if, as much as the power is being diffused to some extent, right? Mm-hmm. In the end, for anything, even right now, where our space program, this public-private partnership that's going on, is very modest so far, right? Mm-hmm. Even the next stage is going back to the moon, where we were 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And even for this, private companies may be doing the lion's share of the work in some ways, but the funding can only come from the U.S. government. Only the U.S. government has the money to do even this modest thing. If it's going to be more ambitious, Mars, whatever, it's still going to have to be probably the U.S. government. Therefore, the vision is still going to have to come from there, right? Like at some point, if this thing is going to continue and expand, that vision, that purpose isn't going to come from the Bezos and the Musk.
I agree.
It's going to come, right? Doesn't it? Just because of the
And it already, there's the money, but I also think it's about purpose. If you have the government involved, you can say you're doing a service for the American, which it behooves one to do that. I'm not saying that as like it's a tricky thing, but I think you're right on it, because I remember when going to the moon was called a distraction at SpaceX. It was actually called a distraction. It was vitriolically called a distraction. And now the Human Landing Systems, HLS, the first milestone is going to the moon.
Wow.
And that is the power of the United States government.
Right.
And what it represents, real and figurative.
Yeah.
100% though.
Vision and money. Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. So you resigned how many months ago now?
It was May. So
4 or 5 months? 4 or 5 months?
Something like that. Yeah.
So what are you thinking and feeling about the decision?
My decision came from my heart. There were layoffs in 2019, and those layoffs impacted a very important connection of mine. And I never forgave SpaceX for that. I didn't forgive them for how they did it. I didn't forgive them for who they did it to. And I also felt like, how dare you? You can be mean to me, but you don't get to mess with my heart. You don't get to do that. And I saw the impact that decision had on this person. And I wanted no part of it. So I decided in that moment, I needed to figure out how to get all the skills that I wanted to put on my resume, because up until that point, I was a brown man who was allowed to do math for people, but I was not allowed to be very imaginative on my own. And I experienced that as a very real problem there. I think self-selection is a thing, and I think some of it is conscious, and I think a lion's share of it is unconscious. So like they worked their way into my heart, and I was not okay with that. I was not going to tolerate that. And I was like, but I got to figure out how to say, I know how to do the things I want to say I know how to do on paper. So I made it my vision and my purpose to figure that out. And I did, to the best of my ability. And it like my decision, like I made the decision in that moment, but it took me 5 years to leave because I wanted to go to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but the government kept on screwing them over. And honestly, like even when I was talking to them, they had issues with me being a person who knew math and had an opinion about it. They wanted, a lot of the people I spoke to wanted me to be a yes man. A lot of them thought that because I work at SpaceX that I am full of shit and that I don't actually know how to do anything. So I was dealing with bias from all different angles, including the place I was working at. And then this year comes around and, you know, I'm in a meeting with someone who I'm pretty sure was in those rooms in 2019 when they were deciding who got to stay and who got to leave. And he said some things about a project that I was working on that he had no business saying, that he was wrong about. And I realized in hindsight that it triggered me and it made me think about what they did to this person who I care about immensely. And I was like, fuck this, I'm done. And so I have zero regrets, Mr. Walker. Every day is more unencumbered than the last. I feel like what I got from that place was how to be effective when people don't actually put a premium on being effective. They put a premium on looking right. And now I get to be amongst people who are like, hey, you worked on this thing, and the people who you worked on it with liked working with you. We want to work with you. And I love that. I don't ever want to feel owned ever again. So no regrets, not a single regret.
Wow.
I wish everyone who's there the best. I sincerely wish them the best. But like it might sound haughty, but it's not coming from a haughty place. I outgrew what they are trying to do. And I outgrew trying to help them figure out what they want to do. I think the inevitability of any place like that is that it becomes a monolith, and any place that's a monolith is bound to lose sight of what it actually needs to do to stay relevant. It becomes self-referential. It's just the way of things. I mean, honestly, I think, if I may, I think that's part of why you went to the life school, right? Like you like things were getting kind of congealed, right? I could see it in you. In fact, as a student, I saw it in you.
Yeah, I mean, I felt I wanted to be someplace where I would be surrounded by like-minded people who wanted to push the envelope of what great teaching and learning could be like, and explore them, and take risks and do all that, and to do it in an atmosphere that felt mutually supportive and loving and safe. And yeah, and it's wonderful when you're working under those circumstances.
And another thing I would like to add is leaving SpaceX has been so. One of my best friends, she said to me the other day, and she has said it a few times, because she met me. I first was friends with her husband, who also left SpaceX last year. And then I met her, like, I've been friends with her for 10 years now. So like, I'm friends with both of them, but she met me when I was at SpaceX. That was the first time she met me. So like afterwards, she's like, Meharban, I did not know how much you were withstanding. I didn't know who you were. Like, who are you? This is who you are? I mean, I'm here for it, but shit, I feel like I am now learning who my friend Meharban really is. I'm like, so am I. So am I. I write more than I did before. I perform more poetry than I did.
Wow.
And the thing is that, like, the way I express is like, I don't feel like I'm proving. I'm like, I'm welcoming you to enter this space. And it's like, I don't, like, my shoulders drop. My voice doesn't need extra intonation. I slow down when I want to slow down. I speed up when I want to speed up. And I don't have a sense of urgency, but I have a sense of satisfaction in my expression. And I think that's because, like, letting SpaceX go behind me was really important for that. Because while I was still there, I had so much shame and so much rage for being there, especially after what happened in 2019 with that one person. I had so much shame. Like, when I gave my manager my notice, like, I told him, you don't know how much shame I've been living with. And he was like, what are you ashamed of? You've done great things. I was like, no, we'll have this conversation as men when I don't work for you anymore. But no, like, I have shame, and like, the shame has taken years off my life because, like, I'm so upset that I could not and did not make this decision sooner because it's just so unfair to that connection, to me as well. And so, like, while I was there longer than I wanted to be, I found purpose in being people's advocate and showing up for them and using my position, my authority, and my title to be like, hey, I don't have the answer to this, but this person who, like, has always been told to shut up and leave the room, hey, can you, who happens to be a woman, I'm gonna move, you can sit. Tell them what you think. I found all the ways possible to do that. And so I was white knuckling on being there for people.
Mm.
And so, like my mom said, I needed to leave.
Right.
And like what happens with my heart, what happens with that connection is a journey right now, but like it doesn't change the fact that I needed to leave.
Right.
And so as you are figuring out what's next, like what do you have a sense of purpose? Like what your new purpose will be?
Yeah. So I want to work in green technology, biomedical, and whatever's left is aerospace. So I have found companies that allow me to do all of those. I have multiple clients as a consultant that I get to work on all these things. And more importantly, I get to work with fantastic people who it's been such a joy to be let into these people's companies as a consultant. And when they see that I want to serve, like they're like, okay, like you don't need to be a full-time employee for us to really be invested in what you're saying and for us to know that you're invested in us. Like the fact that it's contract work, but there's so much heart there. Oh my God, I'm so happy about that. So happy about that. And I've gotten to work with people from SpaceX who have scar tissue. And I worked through a lot of my things in the 5 years that I was there because I needed to do something. Otherwise, I just would have been festering. There's always work for us to do on ourselves, but the lion's share of things that I think a lot of people struggle with even now after leaving SpaceX many years ago, there are a lot of things where like I'm not dealing with a lot of the things that some of the people around me are. And I love showing up with a sense of humor and grace.
And it sounds like also, like some people don't like being a consultant, right? It's too isolating. You maybe don't have the continuity of experience. But it sounds like for you, at least so far, and it's early on, you get to define your own sense of purpose, right? Your mission right now. You get to be in a situation where in a wider variety of contexts, you still get to work on sticky problems with cool people, right? Mm-hmm. You still get that sense of like collaboration, right? And mutual exploration and problem solving and all that without any of the corporate like
trappings.
Yeah, right. And the career advancement and the politics and all that stuff, you're liberated from that, right? It's one of the beauties for you. Like you get to do all the cool work, and then when it comes time for all the like, corporate politics and all that stuff,
I got to go across town and talk to the client.
Yeah. So it sounds like a good match so far, at least for where you're at.
It is.
That's great.
It is. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Filligan, this was a phenomenal conversation. Boy, and we're so generous of spirit in sharing some difficult things along the way, too. I really appreciate that. And being so, as I said before, just so genuine and authentic and honest and insightful, right? I think you were very insightful about yourself and things that happened to you and decisions you made. I hope people will take away from it. And I really do that you're a great example, I think, of, someone who is able to, do the continual work and reflection on yourself and your own internal, challenges and demons that we all have our own, right? But also, like we said earlier, to chart your own path and figure it out as you go, but do it in a way that kept coming back to some really interesting touchstones, right? Repeatedly. And I think that speaks volumes, right? That's why, when I called my company and this podcast Integrity and Joy, it was really the underlying thing that you have to get in touch with what really matters to you, what your core values are, what your purpose is, and then try to live in accordance with those every day and have that somehow be the thing that guides you through these difficult decisions. And when you're lost in the fog of trying to figure out what you're going to do next or how to get through a difficult situation, relationship, job, whatever, that these are the things that we come back to and eventually are the things that help guide us along the way. It sounds like that's the way you've been able to do it, which is really wonderful through some really difficult circumstances. I really appreciate. Yeah, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being willing to share this, and hope that the people listening can appreciate that too.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, and thank you for making the space. I'm proud of you for doing this.
Oh, thanks.
Like, I love this for you.
Yeah, it's fun so far. So, and again, like when I started the company and I started putting little videos on social media, I'm like, a lot of people may not like these, but if one person likes one of them, mission accomplished. I'm doing this down. I'm playing with house money. I'm doing this just to try and help people and make a difference, and it's fun doing that. So if one person out there goes, "Hey, that was a great episode," then it's worth doing it. Selfishly, this is worth doing it just for us. So. But thank you, and enjoy your time in New Zealand. I don't think we said that at the beginning. You're in New Zealand. I'm jealous. I hope to get there in the next year or two. So enjoy your time there and safe travels.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
You too. Bye-bye.
See ya.
So thank you once again to Meharban Sobti for being my guest and for sharing his unbelievable story. The authenticity, the vulnerability that he demonstrated throughout the conversation was very moving for me. It's heartbreaking to listen to the discrimination, the bullying that he experienced as a kid, and even discrimination and othering throughout his life, and to feel that way in your own country, that you're treated as the other, and get that message at a young age. That is just heartbreaking. We have to do better. It's one of the things that's really troubling about what's going on right now in the country is just how much the xenophobia and the nativism has taken root with so many people. We have to do better at how we treat each other. And here's a guy born in the United States, American citizen, and was, treated so harshly. But incredible, going on and going to USC and the perseverance he showed there, battling with mental health struggles and academic challenges as well, and showed tremendous grit and resilience to go on and complete his studies at USC and get his master's. While the last 2.5 years he was there, he was doing the co-op at SpaceX and then became a permanent employee there. Just incredible, that story, right? I hope there are people who are facing their own struggles, either academically or in life, professionally or personally, and hear that story of the perseverance and grit that he demonstrated. Just incredible. Inspirational, I hope. And then I thought the whole story about SpaceX and his experience there was so incredibly interesting too. And we recorded this, several months ago, obviously, as I said at the beginning, and so we didn't know how things were going to turn out with the election and Elon Musk's involvement in the Trump administration. But I think listening to our conversation again, I thought there were some really interesting observations that he had that are very relevant to what's going on right now. And so lots to think about and an interesting context to put it in. Anyway, so I thought it was great. And I hope you did too. Thanks again for listening. Again, hope you're following the podcast. Please rate and review if you haven't already. And please share this with someone that who might be interested in this. Maybe they're interested in, Elon Musk, or they're interested in SpaceX, or they're interested in just really inspirational stories. So thanks, and I look forward to continuing the conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for listening. If today's episode resonated with you, imagine what we could accomplish together in a one-to-one coaching session. Visit integrityandjoy.com to learn more and book your free consultation. Let's create the life you've been striving for.